Let's start by talking about what is clearly very topical these days, and that is these pipelines. Claire, why don't you start us off in this? The Keystone pipeline, of course, would be built, if it is built, from Alberta south to Texas. In your view, should it be built?
No, not at this moment. So
why not?
I would say, so in our organization, I would say we're not anti-pipeline in principle, but we think at this point in time, when you don't have the environmental management regime that you need, expanding production in the oil sands, which is what this pipeline would enable, is the wrong choice. And so when we look at the Keystone proposal, if it were to be filled to capacity with new oil sands production, that would mean a 36% increase in the oil sands, which is equivalent to adding over 4 million new cars to the road. And this is already a sector, this is a sector that's on track to be the single largest source of growth in Canada's greenhouse gas pollution. At this point, neither in Alberta or Canada do we have an adequate plan to manage that pollution, not to mention the local environmental impacts.
Let me get Robert Skinner's view on this. Should we build Keystone or not?
Yes, we should. We have about 3.5 million barrels a day of pipeline capacity to move the oil out of Canada and across Canada. The pipeline to the west coast, the existing Trans Mountain pipeline owned by Kinder Morgan, is nearly 40% oversubscribed. And the Enbridge system is a little under 20% oversubscribed. So we are tight right now today. It's not a matter of waiting for 2016, 2017 for new pipeline capacity. And we've seen this and we've heard about it ad nauseum over the last year or so, how Canadian oil prices are discounted, and therefore all Canadians suffer as a result of that.
Robert, could I get you to speak to Claire's point, though, that she doesn't believe there are adequate environmental regulations in place to make this make sense for our planet? What do you say to that?
Well, I think Claire's point is that there are not adequate, in her view, environmental regulations in place for the oil sands development in Alberta. And so she's saying, therefore, don't allow pipelines to take away the oil from the oil sands. I would challenge her on that there are environmental regulations, indeed, lots of environmental regulations on the oil sands. Quite true, there are no specific federal, if you like, regulations pertaining to greenhouse gases, but there are there is an Alberta regime. Granted, it's not huge, but it is a start, and so it's not a fair comment to say that the oil sands are not subject to adequate environmental regulations.
Claire, before I get Jim in for his comment, do you want to just come back on that angle of it?
Sure. So I mean, absolutely, we're in agreement. There is no federal constraint of any kind on greenhouse gas pollution from the oil sands. The Alberta regime, absolutely, they were one of the first to put a price on greenhouse gas pollution. Unfortunately, that price is at a maximum 20 cents on a barrel, and so it is not a strong enough incentive to change business as usual in the oil sands. So right now, the growth projected in that sector is such that it would cancel out all the emission reductions other parts of the economy are projected to make to 2020 and have Canada miss its climate target for 2020 by a very wide margin.
Okay, Claire is against, Robert is for. Jim, you have to break the tie. What would you do?
Well, I'll throw my vote in with Claire. In addition to the environmental concerns that she raised, I certainly share those, although I'm not an environmental expert. I also have some economic concerns about the idea of a whole infrastructure that's set up to extract a raw, unprocessed resource and export it to foreigners. We have a bit of experience in Canada with that model of business, going back to fish and fur trade and timbers and so on. In general, rather than extracting a raw resource and shipping it out, it's much better for Canada to try to add value to it, to use that resource ourselves. Right now, the whole industry is suffering from this depressed price for our export product in the U.S. Mid-continent market. And that price is depressed in part because we're shipping so much there. Yet at the same time, in Eastern Canada, we're paying very high world prices for oil that we use here. It would make a heck of a lot more sense for us to use our own resource, upgrade it and refine it here, and save the money that we're paying on the foreign side.
Jim, do you worry you sound a little xenophobic when you say we shouldn't be doing this and sending it to foreigners? That's a real trigger.
Foreigners? Word. Okay, well maybe
those are American
I shouldn't.
Neighbors, you know?
Okay, I'll think about that. But that is the tradition in this Staples model of development that we have followed. And other countries in the world, even countries that don't have any resources, have prospered by using technology, innovation, skills, adding value to things. So we send, believe it or not, raw lumber to Scandinavia where they turn it into furniture and sell it back to us. When are we going to learn? We'd better be making furniture ourselves. Same thing goes for fish that we catch, ship it to China, have it processed, and then send it back here. And exactly the same arguments are in play here. A pipeline that's designed to extract and sell raw bitumen is going to create a few jobs, but we would do a lot more if we were regulating the industry, making sure that Canadian jobs were attached to it, and then using the product ourselves. Robert,
can I get your view on that? Is he right or wrong?
Well, when he says if we were regulating the industry, is Mr. Stanford saying that we should force the industry to build more upgraders in Alberta or in Canada? There are 5 upgraders in Alberta, and one that's under construction that was basically done with a deal with the provincial government using its royalty share oil dedicated to the upgrader. But the simple fact is that they need to make money, and I've been associated with at least 2 upgrader projects with 2 of the companies that I have worked for in the past. And we just failed to find it economically feasible to build an upgrader in Alberta. First of all an upgrader is it's an interim refinery process, and then you send the synthetic crude to real refineries to do the further processing to put them into final products so that we can all drive around in our cars or whatever. But what we're talking about now is a lot of production coming out of the oil sands. It should be refined close to where the market is, where it's consumed. And so that, the best refineries in the world for processing that happen to be on the U.S. Gulf Coast. Yes, the Canadian refineries in Sarnia and in Ontario and so on are increasing very slowly their capacity to handle those heavy barrels. But if Jim Stanford can build an upgrader in Ontario and make the economics work, then more power to him.
The suggestion is you can't, Jim.
Well, the upgrading, as Robert says, is the first part of the process. And a major reason the economics of upgrading in Alberta have been so challenged is they're playing off a margin between one depressed price, that is the price for unupgraded bitumen, and another depressed price, which is still that Oklahoma-driven price for synthetic crude or light crude. What we need to do is actually take the oil to where the real action is, where the real margin is, and that's on what we're paying in Eastern Canada. So we've got refineries in Sarnia, in Montreal, St. John, New Brunswick, that all could eventually, with the right investments and the right transportation infrastructure, use that resource, and then we're creating the jobs here. We're doing it for the market here, and Canadian consumers down here will save some money while we're at it.
Let me take another angle at this with you again, just on a follow-up. Does the CAW represent any of the people who are working in the oil patch right now?
Well, we are going through this process with another union, Communication, Energy and Paper Union,
right. You're
the
trying to merge.
CEP. We're going to form a new union. It will be launched this Labor Day, and so we will represent thousands of workers in the oil patch, but also the refinery sector.
See, my hunch is, I don't know this, you know your people better than I do, but my hunch is, if I asked them, they would say, bring it on, baby. They would say, let's develop. There's good, high-paying jobs in there. Let's get them.
Well, I'm in favor of the high-paying jobs, and I'm in favor of developing the resource, but developing it carefully. And our view is aligned with the CEP's view on this. They view it as a long-run undermining of the sustainability and quality of the jobs to be exporting the raw resource. So the CEP, as I've argued, is in favor of regulating the developments more closely, making sure there's more Canadian content in the projects, and then using the resource to fuel Eastern Canadian refineries, where CEP members also work.
Okay. Claire, let me get you in on this angle. You know, you've heard Tom Mulcair, for example, the leader of the NDP, talk about his concerns that an overheated oil patch could lead to a so-called Dutch disease here in Canada, where you've got an overinflated currency and you become, in some respects, a petrostate and everything else suffers. Do you think we're really running the risk of having that happen here?
I do. Yeah, we've done analysis looking at that question, and we said there's a sort of a particularly Canadian strain of this Dutch disease phenomenon, and we called it oil sands fever, but it's essentially that same prognosis, that you are in a state of having an overheated dollar and that there are consequences for the manufacturing sector there. And I thought it was very interesting. In the federal budget yesterday, we saw a government that has categorically rejected that diagnosis of Dutch disease, putting in place measures because they hope to help the manufacturing sector. So I think it is a real phenomenon, and it's one that we have to be aware of. There's a lot of volatility and economic risk associated with putting too many of our eggs into this one basket.
Robert, would you agree that Dutch disease, Canadian style, is a concern we ought to watch out for?
Well, I'm not an economist. I have read the various reports about Canada's so-called Dutch disease. I've just read a report that says that even the Dutch didn't suffer from the Dutch disease. That their manufacturing sector actually grew after the discovery of gas in the Groningen field offshore the Netherlands in the last century. But my understanding as well is that it's not so much the Canadian dollar appreciated, but rather the US dollar depreciated relative to other international currencies, and that the forest product industry, the apparel industry, and so on, they collapsed in the United States, as did the auto industry, and Jim knows that better than anybody. And of course, those sectors suffered in Canada as well. But I think that the Dutch disease is kind of it's a convenient sort of scary tactic to put out there. It's very emotive, and I think it clouds the issue. The government is obviously trying to do something for the manufacturing sector. The manufacturing sector in Canada has been declining for years, and some more than others. And I understand that and Jim referred to that earlier, that it's actually on the rebound. And the auto sector is I think 3 out of 18 sectors in terms of its current rebound. So
okay, let me ask all of you to move your attention now from Keystone to Northern Gateway. The notion of building a new pipeline which would take natural resources to the west and presumably to serve the burgeoning Pacific market. Jim, do you like this idea any more than you don't like Keystone?
Well, I think the odds of Keystone are probably 50-50. I would say the odds on Northern Gateway are 99-1. I just
Against.
think, yeah, absolutely.
How
I
come?
think realistically, the political opposition in British Columbia, the political opposition from most First Nations communities, the enormous environmental issues associated with the tanker traffic, I can't see that happening. And this is where an enlightened petroleum industry has to look at this, and instead of trying to browbeat people into accepting something that really is a non-starter, let's talk together about other ways that we can try and add some value to the resource. Let's take the oil down here and we'll use it in Canada.
Claire, what about the idea, though, of opening up to this burgeoning Pacific market? That seems to have a lot of appeal, certainly for those in the business.
Well, for those in the business, perhaps, but I would echo Jim's comments in terms of the opposition along the route of the pipeline in British Columbia, in the government, First Nations, etc. This is not your average pipeline. This is going through some pristine wilderness, and I think some of these proposals are worse than others, and this is one where I really don't think there is a case to build this pipeline.
Well, Robert, you may be outvoted again, but why don't you make the case if you think there is one for Northern Gateway?
Well, I knew before coming on the show, Steve, that I would be outvoted on this. I mean, there's no question that Gateway is in difficulty. It faces enormous opposition, and there's a political context over there as well that I think we need to be realistic about. But also we need to be realistic about the fact that oil has been going to the West Coast on the Trans Mountain pipeline since 1953, in the 1950s. It's about 300,000 barrels a day, not only crude oil but also product. And there's a proposal to expand the Trans Mountain to about 800,000 or 700 and some odd thousand barrels a day. And and that goes right into Burnaby, BC, and into Vancouver. And there have been tankers coming and going under the bridge past Vancouver for decades, and without incident. And it was recently looped from Hinton up through. I think Claire, you would agree with me, a very beautiful area called Jasper Park National Park. And without incident, in fact, it won awards I mean, I'm no fan of Kinder Morgan or any pipeline company, but I think we need to be realistic. And in terms of oil going to the East Coast, you usually take oil to where it's consumed and where it's wanted. The East Coast of North America is a declining market at best, and so you're going to take it down there, and you're going to have to export it. I mean, they use very little amounts of oil. And where is it going to go? It would likely go around down to the Gulf of Mexico, to those refineries I mentioned earlier. So, I mean, we must be realistic. And Jim, I would ask you, do you not think that the price, the depressed price now of oil, once it gets to Tidewater, where it's going to be facing Brent price, there's not going to be arbitrage of those prices, and the price is going to go up? Or are you thinking that somehow the Canadian price would stay low and we would revert back to the 70s and the first part of the 80s when we had a made in Canada lower than world price? Is that where you think this will go?
Well, the issue on the Keystone is different than the issue on the Trans Mountain. The Keystone just
I'm talking about the one to go to Irving, which you mentioned, and you said so we could have lower prices in Canada. And I was also talking about to the West Coast.
Right.
Once you get it to Tidewater and competing with Brent prices, don't you think that there's going to be arbitrage and the price will come back up?
Well, the Keystone still takes you to Tidewater. It just takes you to Tidewater in a mid-continental market that's still got supply glut. So all you're really doing with Keystone is shifting the source of the excess supply a little bit further south. I don't think Keystone would solve the Canadian discount at all. Keystone
will go to the Gulf of Mexico, where it will be where the oil will be then competing with imported crudes.
Yeah, and then.
But hang on, Jim. Speak to his point about it makes neither economic nor ultimately, at the end of the day, transportational sense to move the oil to the East Coast, where there is not an adequate market for it, and where presumably you have to ship it by tanker down to the Gulf of Mexico, which opens up a whole other host of environmental
I'm not interested
concerns.
in doing that. I'm not interested in doing that. First of all, we got a partial transportation infrastructure to take the resource to the east already, right? In terms of completing lines and reversing lines, it's not building a new pipeline from scratch. Secondly, we've got refineries there that are underutilized and don't have security of supply for their resource. Refineries that are already built and that are important sources of good jobs for the Canadians who work there. Third of all, you've got consumers in Eastern Canada who are paying the world price for their feedstock. So I think that is a winning recipe. It wouldn't require billions of dollars in a new pipeline. It wouldn't require the environmental risks associated with the Trans Mountain pipeline, although there are environmental risks that would have to be managed even with the East-West pipeline.
But if the principle is to refine as close to markets as possible, how does this do that?
Well, there is a market in Eastern Canada for the refining. Well, I don't know. There's most Canadians live in Ontario and points east. So, including Sarnia, Montreal, and St. John, you've got refineries that could supply a domestic market, or we still do export some refined petroleum products from Canada, not as much as we should. And that's better to export, if you're going to export, than exporting the raw bitumen.
Robert, are you underestimating how much market there is there?
Already goes to Sarnia.
Well,
and remember, in the 70s, the government made a conscious decision along these lines to build the so-called Line 9 from Sarnia to Montreal. And it was manifestly an energy security project in 1976. And also 1976-77, and also it was to bring Quebec into the umbilicus of Canadian oil. It was very much a political fact. That pipeline was reversed. In fact, it was subsidized, and one of my jobs in the 80s was to write the monthly check to the pipeline company to cover the costs not covered by the oil moving on that government-dictated pipeline. It was reversed, and now they want to reverse it again back to Montreal. That makes sense if the market is there, and if the refineries can process the crude, and if they can sell the products into what is a very stagnant market and a very small market. There are refineries on the east coast of the United States that are closing.
Okay, friends, let me jump in here because I don't want the clock to get away from us before we talk about what we really need to get a better handle on, and that is the notion that many people advance that we need a national energy strategy in this country, and we don't have one. Claire, can I get you just to weigh in off the top here on this expression? When we talk about a national energy strategy, what do you mean?
Yeah, so first of all, we are supportive of that notion, and I think it's particularly important in Canada. So obviously energy is a big part of GDP, it's a big part of all of our lives, and it's a huge part of the climate change situation. 80% of the greenhouse gases in Canada are attributed to energy. So, this is something that we need to think about. So from our perspective, a national energy strategy needs to look long-term. Whether you're talking about building a pipeline or about meeting climate targets, multi-decades, it's very, very important to take that longer-term view. We certainly would never see this as sort of a way to make the conversation about oil sands and pipelines simply an easier thing. This has to be much broader, so it has to look beyond sort of conventional or fossil fuels energy to look at clean energy and making that transition to a lower carbon economy. So I think we want it to be inclusive. We want it to be something that provides energy services to Canadians that are fair and that moves us into a leadership position in a clean energy future.
Okay, let me follow up with this, Claire. There are some people who say we have a national energy strategy. It's called the markets. The markets will decide how this thing rolls out. Otherwise, you've got too much government intervention and who knows what happens after that. How would you respond to that line of argument?
I think that we are absolutely, yes, we have a free market aspect to our energy, but there is also a huge role for government right now, and that needs to continue and in fact be accelerated in terms of dealing with the climate change aspects, because right now the greenhouse gas pollution that's being created when we do things like extraction in the oil sands is not carrying the price tag that it should. It's something that is imposing a cost on society that is not currently being priced in. So there is a huge role for government, as we all know, in terms of safety, in terms of environmental regulation, and all of these things. And I think we have a huge number of governments in this country who want to see a national energy strategy or who want to see more coherence on these issues. Obviously, Premier Redford in Alberta, many of her colleagues that talk about this through the Council of the Federation. Unfortunately, I think the government that has been missing in action largely on this is the federal government, with Minister Oliver being quite uninterested in this notion. And I think that's really unfortunate, because Ottawa does have a huge role, particularly as the government that takes climate commitments and goes to the world and says, yes, here's our target. They do need to be at the table at this conversation.
Robert, do we need a national energy strategy?
No. We have a policy. We have an energy policy. Claire touched on one of the elements. It's very brief. It's on the Natural Resources Canada website. It was written in 1986, and it's been there for a long time. It relies on market mechanisms, that's for sure. It respects the jurisdiction of the provinces. That is an extremely important factor in contemplating a federal government getting into an area of policy which is virtually dominated by the provinces. But it does not rule out intervention, in particular where it comes to health, safety, and the environment, and to protect competition. The most simple, briefest energy strategy we've had in Canada is the one we have now. The most short-lived and the most complicated one was the National Energy Program, where it touched on everything and used terms like fairness, as Claire just used. And it lasted a very short time and really had severe implications for the fabric of Canadian society.
Jim, do we need a national energy strategy?
Just let me finish.
Go ahead, Robert. Yeah.
Having done strategy in corporations and having done strategy in think tanks and in academia and also in industry, strategy is an ongoing dialogue, and I think governments are structurally incapable of having a strategy for the simple reason is that it takes months to organize a federal provincial meeting to discuss an item. In that time, the world into which we're exporting our products is changing. Markets are changing. We have to remain flexible and supple enough and not tie ourselves into knots with a strategy or some kind of a plan because governments will have to write something. It takes years to write something. The first energy strategy for Canada in 1973 was launched in December of 1970. And by the time they got around to publishing it in 1973, the world, as we all know, fundamentally changed.
It's out of date. Yeah. Okay, let me hear from Jim Stanford on this. Do we need a national energy strategy?
Well, I agree with Robert that we have a national energy strategy. I think it relies on deregulation, giving energy producers the right to produce as much as they want and sell it to where they want. And I think that approach has been wrong. It's, first of all, an imperfect market. It isn't complete, as Claire mentioned. You're not internalizing the costs of the pollution, and we can't go on producing like that. And I think it's encountering its limits, environmental limits and political limits, where the rest of Canada sees this juggernaut from northern Alberta and stops having sympathy for it. I think if we had some kind of a dialogue, as Robert said, within Canada, between the provinces, to say, yes, this is an enormous resource, but we're going to develop it carefully. We're going to make sure that other Canadians benefit, as opposed to just saying you're all going to benefit, and make sure that the environmental costs are addressed. Balance it with the other sources of energy that we need to rely on. Then you could get some buy-in. But I think this current approach of leaving it to the so-called market is really running out of steam, and we've seen some fraying around the edges of that whole bitumen bubble, if you like, in the last few months.
Well, in a need to be brief here, I'm going to chip away at the. I won't be as fulsome in my description of what I think the Harper government's up to here, but my sense of it is they see the federal government's business in this area as sort of sticking to its knitting, that there's a constitution in place, that natural resources are in the province of the provinces, and that the federal government has some, but not the overarching role here, and therefore, that is the interpretation the Prime Minister is using, and that is the approach he is taking. Where's he wrong about that?
I think he's gone further, though. He's celebrated Canada's status as an energy superpower, and they've used the federal tools to try and facilitate, and in some cases subsidize, the whole industry based on the extraction and export of a raw resource. So I don't think they're just bystanders. I think they have played a proactive role in fostering this development. But I also think they're waking up to the limits of it. I think they see the danger signs in terms of the deteriorating economics of the bitumen industry, and they are starting to think, as they did in the last federal budget, we better put some eggs in other baskets at the same time.
Robert, do you see the landscape the same way Jim did there, with the federal government perhaps appreciating the limitations of its position?
No, I think the federal government is coming from experience, and that is if you sit down at a table to talk about an issue that is owned by the provinces, then at the end of the meal, the federal government is left to pick up the bill for those things that the provinces themselves don't want to pay for. That has been my experience since 1970 when I joined the government of Canada. But you know, the market is taking care of it. In many ways, the technological revolution with shale gas and now getting oil from tight formations is actually probably driving the price of oil down. And there are other factors in the world that are bringing the price down. And that, of course, is going to have its impact on the oil sands. Markets work. At the same time, we are not internalizing our carbon costs. I mean, Claire talks about imposing charges or whatever on the oil sands. How about ourselves? I mean, are we paying our carbon emissions costs? Most of the emissions that come from oil come from when we turn the ignition on in our cars, and not in the production of it. Yes, it's carbon intensive, and technologies are being developed to make it less so as we speak. But just to shut it down because we haven't got the answers right now, I think is folly.
Well, nobody said shut it down. I have to jump in on that. Neither Claire nor I said shut it down. That's the oldest straw man in there.
Well, I think you're saying shut it down if you're not going to allow to move the oil to market.
No, we're all saying get the most as we can out of it, respecting the social and environmental interests that are also at play.
Claire, I should get you to respond to that as well.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with how Jim just characterized it. We would never say shut it down. We say develop responsibly. And I think, you know, we are absolutely supportive of putting that price signal throughout the economy, not just on the big producers, you know, in the oil sands or whatever, but on the gasoline that we pay at the pump or throughout the economy. You know, a broad carbon price, I think, is absolutely the way to go. And let industry find whatever flexible way of dealing with that makes sense to them, you know, whether it be to pay the cost, whether it be to invest in new technologies, etc. You know, this is unfortunately an approach that the government here in Ottawa has said no to, and that is forcing them into a situation where, as we've said, you know, there are currently no constraints on this sector. we were talking from a greenhouse gas pollution standpoint. We were talking earlier about, is the federal government realizing the limitations of that approach? I really hope so. I think that's really, the sector has really been under the microscope recently with things like President Obama talking in his second term about taking climate change more seriously. Some of the commentary we've seen sort of linking or implying that stronger climate policy in Canada would help to make the case for something like a Keystone pipeline. Ambassador Jacobson, for example, the U.S. ambassador to Canada, hinted along those lines. I think there are strong signals out there that the current approach from the Harper government is not even in the best interests of the oil and gas sector, let alone in the best interests of Canadians. And I really hope that they are reading the writing on the wall. I think we'll see in the weeks and months ahead, because they are now saying they're getting close to tabling oil and gas regulations. So we'll have a chance to see whether or not that message has made its way through.
Okay, but Jim, let me get you to comment on this notion of shutting it down, because you're not saying it, Claire's not saying it, but there are those in the environmental movement who are saying they're opposed to any development of the oil sands. They don't think it can be done responsibly at all. There are no regulations in place that could work, and therefore, shut it down. Are they hurting your side of the argument by taking that position?
I'm not that familiar with that argument. I mean, there is this enormous thing there in northern Alberta today, so I don't see how you can snap your fingers and have it disappear. My goal would be to, how can you manage that resource? How can you get more benefit for Canadians from it and less cost from it? That seems to be a sensible incremental approach, and I think there's good ways to get more benefit. I've talked about adding value, not just by refining the product here, but also using more Canadian-made equipment and supplies and services in building the mines. Instead of those big trucks made by Caterpillar in the United States, why don't we use Canadian-made equipment in those mines? Those are the sort of ways, again, that you can increase the net benefits to Canadians and get more buy-in from Canadians for the whole project.
Robert, with just a few minutes to go here, I wonder if I could get you to talk to us about whether you see some middle ground between these two positions here. There's a lot of disagreement about pipelines. There's a lot of disagreement about how much and how responsibly the oil sands can be developed. Do you see a middle ground?
Well, first of all, Claire said XL shouldn't go ahead. Jim said that there's no chance that Gateway is going to go ahead. And we've recognized that there's no market to go to the East Coast. So that basically says, it doesn't say shut it down, it says don't allow egress to markets for the output of something, and therefore that's effectively saying it's not going to increase its output. But I do think we need to have a price on our carbon. And I mean all carbon, not just the
Hang
carbon
on, say that again.
from a particular industry.
You think we should have a carbon tax?
Absolutely. I've always said that.
Okay, do you know anybody in the federal government today who's saying that?
Study at the OECD, and if you price something, if you price it bad, you'll get rid of it. I mean, the countries that do have carbon taxes, they're not basket cases.
Okay, do you know anybody in the federal government today who's saying that?
I know a lot who would say it to me over a drink, but I know a lot that no one will say it publicly.
Okay, let's go have a drink then.
I think there's a lot of people who'd like you to take the PM and his energy minister out for a drink then. Do you think you can make that happen? We shall see.
I would love to.
Jim, is there a Lorraine, just tell me, how am I doing on time here? Okay, we got 30 seconds left. Can you tell me whether you see any middle ground here? So far, I see two very different positions on all the major issues when it comes to energy in this country. Is there a compromise to be had here?
Oh, I think absolutely. It isn't about shutting the oil sands industry down. Not building more pipelines doesn't mean you're eliminating what's already there. And I think there's all kinds of ways to get more net benefit for Canadians, more value added upstream and downstream, more attention to the environmental costs in a way that all Canadians will start to see this as a valuable resource.
Okay. I want to thank all three of you for coming on the agenda tonight and having this discussion, this debate on our program, starting with Robert Skinner in our Ottawa studios, the former Assistant Deputy Minister in the Department of Energy many moons ago, right, Robert?
Many
moons ago. We're glad that you could join us from Calgary tonight. Claire Demers from the Pembina, you're in Calgary. Claire Demers from the Pembina Institute, who is in Ottawa. I'll get it straight. I've only been doing this for 7 years. And Jim Stanford from the Canadian Auto Workers here in our Toronto studios. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, Steve.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.